As we all know, Pixar is known for its many bullseyes. But I'm gonna be brave and say it. This one, I think, misses the mark.
Even as of 2024, I would argue that the vast majority of Pixar movies are of a high standard. That said, I am of the very strong opinion that the quality has noticeably dipped ever since circa 2010, as Toy Story 3 heralded a new age of second-rate sequels and lesser movies. Movies that are still impressive from a technical standpoint, of course, but which lack the tightly written and sophisticated narratives of the movies that preceded them. The movies of this era are very hit and miss. It's a real mixed bag of critically acclaimed modern classics and, well, not necessarily awful, but substandard, for Pixar at least. But there's one movie that continues to divide audiences, and that would be Brave. It has a lot of fans, and I've spoken with many people, including a fair few friends of mine, who consider this movie to be vastly underrated. But me, I've never really liked this movie much, and I want to explain why.
Obviously, this is simply my opinion.
This means war!
I just have some problems with this movie that I just want to talk about.
Now, contrary to what the title of this video might suggest, this movie is far from the worst ever made. There are several aspects that I think are commendable. The setting, the voice acting, and the rousing folk-inspired music all work hand in hand to emanate a captivating and believable world. The character designs too are fairly unique, and while some look downright hideous, it nonetheless sits well with the general aesthetic of the movie.
Again, I'm not saying this movie is downright hideous, it just has a certain edge to it. It's not so cutesy, and I think that's respectable.
From the cold opening alone, the audience gets the impression that this is not going to be your average toddler fodder animated movie. This is a darker, edgier, more mature tale than what we've come to expect from Pixar, or at least this is what the opening implies. In fact, the cold opening alone is fantastic. I love how it builds to such an impactful crescendo as more do attacks. It genuinely feels as though this movie is going to be an epic experience.
Come on, you!
But then this happens.
There's a day when I don't have to be a princess.
Misleadingly, as soon as our protagonist Merida is properly introduced with your typical first-person narrative, the movie quickly devolves into average Disney princess schlock.
And the sky is clear and bright.
Don't get me wrong, I like most Disney princess movies, but for a Pixar movie, this feels a little weak and cliched. A few of my viewers will already know I have a soft spot for folk rock-driven ballads and female singer-songwriters, and Merida's introductory song Touch the Sky, performed by Julie Fowlis, is a pleasant and melodic song in its own right. As a standalone song, I rather like it, but in the context of the movie, this is such a major come down after such an epic opening.
Come on, you!
The disappointment is not entirely due to the placement of the song itself, however. It's more so due to the fact that Merida's character, to me, doesn't feel all that fleshed out. She's simply a princess who does not want to be a princess.
I want my freedom.
Which at this point is not the most interesting take. This mentality is nothing new, not even in a Disney movie. Take Disney's Aladdin, for example. Princess Jasmine is probably a lot more headstrong than you remember.
The guards just took a boy from the market, on your orders.
And no, she didn't need her own redundant, shouty power ballad to make this any clearer.
I am not a prize to be won.
She herself tires of the trappings that accompany royalty, and yearns for a life outside the palace walls. The major difference between these princesses, though, is that Jasmine's character arc sees her remain at the palace, and married.
I choose you, Aladdin.
Yeah, it's not really much of an arc. It's more of a circle. Although actually, she doesn't really change that much throughout the movie, so you could argue it's not even a shape at all. She's just kind of there.
I mean, she at least gets to choose not to marry a prince, so that's something, I guess, but nothing really changes for her, other than her love interest. So I do understand why some people see Merida as the first to really challenge this traditionalist culture.
I'll be shooting for my own hand.
The problem I have with this, though, is that it's not narratively satisfying as a result.
Now, I'm not suggesting that Merida should be married to a man by the end of the movie by any means. I just think this could have been handled better.
See, from a pro-female empowerment standpoint, I can understand why many viewers would come out in support of Merida. She has every right to do as she sees fit, and if she does not wish to get married, why should she? That's fair enough. My problem, though, is that Merida does not convey herself as a remotely likable character as a result, particularly since she treats her mother with the utmost disrespect.
Just listen.
I am the queen. You listen to me!
Queen Eleanor is insistent that she get married, but this does not make the Queen a bad person. She is simply enforcing what she believes to be the right thing to do. On the contrary, in fact, it's plain to see that she truly cares for Merida and wants what's best for her.
If you could just try to see what I do out of love.
The stalemate between them is based purely on the clashing of their ideologies, so with this in mind, I personally find it very difficult to watch this movie and root for Merida, considering the actions she subsequently undertakes.
I want a spell to change my mum.
Since her mother refuses to change her mind about the betrothal, Merida seeks out a witch, who gives her a cake to change her mum. She's not told what the cake will actually do, but in terms of the movie's narrative, it's obvious that it will change her into a bear.
I understand if you've not seen the movie, that sounds like it came completely out of nowhere, but trust me, if you watch the movie, it does make logical sense. Somehow.
The issue I have with this is that Merida has no idea what this cake will even do. Heck, this thing could kill her for all she knows. And it very nearly does, as Eleanor is gradually subsumed under her newfound bear form, and threatens to become a totally unrecognizable wild animal. Not to mention the fact that she's relentlessly hunted down by her husband and his men. Merida obviously doesn't purposely cause all this to happen, but she willingly feeds her this cake, knowing it will do something, that it will have an impact on her in some form. When you consider this, Merida's actions are nothing if not downright horrible. The tradition might be outdated, but it's not inherently evil, and her mother certainly does not deserve this maltreatment.
Mum?
I mean, you could argue that Merida is acting out of desperation here, but all the same, her actions don't sit right with me.
Now, while I previously mentioned that Eleanor's metamorphosis is hinted at prior to its occurrence, I also have an issue with the whole bear plot of this movie, in that it really does not aid any character development whatsoever.
Sorry, I don't speak bear.
It's an interesting gimmick, sure, although not entirely original. We've seen a Disney character transform into a bear to learn a lesson before, and in my opinion, Disney's brother Bear handles this transformation incredibly well, as it serves a direct purpose to the narrative. I've actually always been somewhat surprised by the lukewarm reception this movie receives. I have some issues with the movie's pacing, but for the most part, it's a highly symbolic and touching movie that deals with some surprisingly dark themes. By becoming a bear, Kenai learns to see life through the eyes of another, and the reason for his transformation finally becomes clear as he realizes the errors of his ways.
I did something very wrong.
By contrast, in Brave, the connection of the bear transformation to the main character's relationship with her mother is tenuous at best. Truthfully, Eleanor's transformation doesn't aid the situation in the slightest. It almost feels tangential to the main plot, as Eleanor has no way of benefiting from being a bear. I didn't realize how stupid that line sounded until I actually said it. Now, you might argue that this leads to some quality bonding time between mother and daughter. I mean, everybody wants a cuddly pet bear, right? But the closest we get to a bonding experience between them is another scene set to lilting soft folk music, during which they merely catch some fish together.
How did we let it come to this?
Really, this is literally it. This montage is the only time Eleanor and Merida are seen spending any real quality time together.
What is this even supposed to portray? Merida's self-reliance? That she and her mother do get along? Because that wasn't the conflict.
I get that this scene is supposed to show Eleanor's understanding that Merida's sense of adventure has practical uses, and that her duties as princess inhibit this, but she still has these duties. This doesn't change. Later in the movie, Eleanor witnesses Merida's rousing speech to end the dispute between the rival clans.
You risked everything for each other.
Now, you might also argue that Merida does at least realize the error of her ways and winds up solving the problem,
I've been selfish.
saving her mother and repairing their relations.
Well, yes and no.
She does indeed manage to sew up the tapestry and thus mend the bond torn by pride. But my issue with this is that she's merely fixing a problem that was instigated by herself. And not only that, she's rewarded for it. Queen Eleanor acquiesces that she does not need to marry if she does not want to. Personally, I think this requires a great deal of suspension of disbelief. From the movie's outset, Eleanor has highlighted the importance of upholding tradition, and that Merida should maintain an air of grace and dignity.
A princess is not a chortle.
She's clearly had this ingrained in her and been of this mentality for her entire life. Realistically, why would witnessing Merida's adventurous side drastically alter her perspective? She already knows she's a skilled archer, having been given a bow at a young age, admittedly against her wishes.
Princess should not have have weapons, in my opinion.
Leave her be.
I get that Eleanor can now see how much these activities outside of the castle mean to Merida, but this shouldn't really come as a surprise. What's more, I get that marriage is perceived to be a burden to Merida, but it does not change the fact that she has responsibilities as a princess, regardless of whether or not she gets married. I personally think that the reasons behind Eleanor's change of heart are not made explicitly clear. Why would Eleanor suddenly submit to her daughter's protests when there's been no talk of the betrothal between them? I feel as though Merida and Eleanor should have a conversation or something after she changes back, simply to elaborate on this, as her stance seems to drastically change without reason.
You changed.
We both have.
Anyway, regardless of her reasons, the Queen decides to break tradition and let everyone marry whomever they choose to, and in their own time. I can understand why you might see this as empowering for Merida, but to me, this is rather morally questionable, and I don't really see this as all that empowering myself.
Honestly, Merida has done nothing throughout this movie besides kick and scream and get her own way. Sure, she saved her mom, but her mom only needs saving because she poisoned her.
If anything, she had a responsibility to rectify her own actions in order to redeem herself, but for some reason she's now been rewarded by being given the opportunity to do with her life as she sees fit.
That's a pretty lousy moral, whether you agree with tradition or not.
In fact, in this respect, Merida reminds me of another horribly written female Pixar character, Gabby from Toy Story 4.
Yes, I know this is going on a bit of a tangent here, but hear me out.
Now, my viewers will know how I feel about this movie after my rant about it a few years ago, but one thing I never really touched on was why Gabby does not work as a character with whom the audience is supposed to empathize. I think it's a commendable concept to have a villain who isn't so one-note, who isn't so irredeemably evil simply because they're evil, but I find it very hard to empathize with Gabby. We're expected to feel sorry for her as she's had a disadvantaged life without a voice box, and hasn't had the opportunities that Woody has had, but this, again, is very morally questionable, as Woody very charitably gives up his voice box for her.
I'm Gabby. Will you be my friend?
This is a frankly depressing turn of events. I get what they were going for by trying to make the villain more well-rounded and relatable, but after having witnessed Gabby spitefully instruct her henchmen to basically tear Woody apart and retrieve his voice box, to see her wind up rewarded by the film's conclusion just leaves a nasty taste in my mouth. Just because somebody has had a disadvantaged upbringing, it does not automatically imply that someone in a more privileged position should give up their fortune for them, especially if the disadvantaged party has already proven that they're clearly not a very nice person.
So yeah, while Gabby would still be considered an antagonist, she and Merida have some surprising similarities. They both throw temper tantrums and get what they want.
Really? What's happened to Pixar's storytelling here? Merida conveys herself as little more than a spoiled brat.
It's not fair.
As a result, I resent the perception of Merida as a strong female character, especially when there are several pre-existing Disney princesses who I believe are of stronger character, who bizarrely passed under the radar. Take Tiana from The Princess and the Frog, for example. She gets rewarded by the movie's conclusion for her own hard work. Yes, she winds up hitched to Prince Naveen, but he's in no way responsible for her success. Her top priority is her business. The romance is merely an additional bonus. There's also Mulan. While she's not strictly a princess, she's nonetheless a part of the Disney princess line. I mean, she proves herself by managing to save all of China, for crying out loud.
You have saved us all.
How is she not given more attention as a positive progressive role model? That's not to mention that this is the first Disney animated movie to see a female protagonist eliminate a male antagonist.
Yeah, it only took 60 years for that accomplishment, and nobody seems to care.
And what about Atlantis, the Lost Empire? Princess Kida is one of the most unconventional Disney princesses, and wow, is she all the better for it. She certainly doesn't go down without a fight. That's also not to mention the fact that Atlantis features a great deal of other surprisingly strong female characters, including femme fatale villain Helga Sinclair and Audrey the Mechanic. Really, just because Merida renounces tradition and stubbornly refuses to get married, she's perceived by some to be a good role model, but I sincerely beg to differ. As I said, it's commendable that she stands her ground, but from a narrative perspective, it simply doesn't work. As a side note, I also have a major issue with the movie's title. I don't really understand how any of her actions can be perceived as brave.
Our fate lives within us. You only have to be brave enough to see it.
Really though, Merida, in what way were you brave? You threw a hissy fit and you poisoned your mum. That's not bravery. If anything, that's cowardice.
Interestingly, in this respect, this movie has something in common with The Good Dinosaur. I'm going somewhere with this, stay with me. Which, believe it or not, despite its major flaws, is something of a guilty pleasure of mine. In terms of its title, The Good Dinosaur does not do a good job of conveying what the movie is about. The fact that protagonist Arlo is good has little to do with the movie at all. In fact, a prominent aspect of Arlo's character is his cowardice, and throughout the movie he evolves into somebody far more self-reliant and, well, braver.
Ironically, Brave would probably have been a better title for this movie. Or The Brave Dinosaur.
Meanwhile, the original working title of Brave, The Bear and the Bow, is far more effective in my opinion, as it more accurately conveys what the movie is about. Overall, I find the movie a little clumsy. There are some interesting ideas here, and as I said at the beginning of the video, there remains a great deal to admire. But for me personally, the story is lacking, and I see Merida as one of Pixar's most poorly written characters. All the same, there's still far worse you can watch. Heck, there are far worse Pixar movies even.
But as I said, I think this movie majorly misses the target, even if it's not completely unbearable.
Thanks everyone for watching as usual. Like last week's video, this was a departure from the usual game reviews, but as you've probably guessed, I'm in a process of working on a review of this movie's tie-in video game, so it'll be interesting to see how that measures up. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back very soon. Bye-bye for now.